Today we're going to go over for loops. For loops are just loops, and they will continue running. The point of a for loop is so that you can do something over and over and over again. So we're going to make a new class just for this lesson. We're going to call loop. Okay. I want you guys to focus and pay attention to this website. Go to, or just Google, because there's Java tutorials. You can use this website, and this is what the for loop is. There's initialization, termination, and increment. Statements just mean the code below it. Don't worry about the word statements. It might confuse you. Just pretend it's not there. So we're going to focus on initialization, and you know what initialization is. You're basically declaring values. So it's like int I, int j, int x, whatever. That's your initialization. Termination just means you're giving it a conditional. So if something is not met, then it stops. That's what termination means. It's just a conditional. Increment basically means you increment. So you can either add 1, subtract 1, add 2, minus 2, whatever the hell you want. So that is initialization, termination, and increment. Now just looking at this, you're not gonna understand, what the hell is this, So I'm gonna dive right into it. We're going to make a program that counts 1 to 10. And it is literally as easy as this. You can just start with for loop 4, and remember what they use. Don't forget the what do you call them? The parentheses. So use the parentheses. It's not very hard. Once you get used to it, it gets really easy. We are going to initialize the initialization part. So we're going to make an integer called I, and we're going to give it a value of 0. Now that is initialization. That's it. Now we are going to the termination phase. When will this loop stop? This loop, I will say, it will stop when it reaches 10, because we wanted to count from 1 to 10. But it might go to 11 because it will run even at 10, so it's going to go to 11. And what's our increment? Or how, what's I going to be after we run it? We want I to add on 1, right? That's what we want. That's our increment. Now, the statements that come after it, never forget to use your brackets, because if you forget to use your brackets, you're just screwing yourself over. These are your brackets, and we're just gonna go system.out, because we want to print it out to the user, right? System.out to print ln because we don't want it going in a straight line, and I wanted to print I. This is a function of a for loop. This is initialization. The int I equals 0 is initialization. I is less than or equal to 10. That is termination, or I would call it the conditional. This is the condition that it has to meet in order for this thing to run. And this is the increment, meaning the step it takes. It add plus plus. I could have replaced this with plus 1. It means the same thing. And when this thing runs, it's going to take I. Is it less than or equal to 10? Yes. I plus 1. I becomes 1. Prints out 1. Equals 1. This is true. Plus 1 equals 2. Prints out 2. So you see how it goes in a loop, 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 until this thing doesn't meet. It doesn't meet the conditional anymore, and then that's when the loop is terminated. That's when it stops. So we will run it. And as you can see, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Goes all the way to 10, and it terminates. This is a loop. Now, I'm going to give you another function. What if we wanted to break out of the loop or stop the loop, in case something happens? So I'm going to do this. If if I happen to equal 5, you know what I wanted to do? I wanted to break. Oh, okay. Don't forget, if we're using relationships, they have to be 2 equals. Then not just 1, because 1 equals means you're assigning it to some value, which means you're not doing anything right. Because we're trying to compare I to 5, we have to use 2 equals. So this is saying, in this loop, it's going to keep going and going and going, supposedly until 10. However, remember, when it loops, because this is part of the loop, it runs through the entire section of code over and over and over again. So as long as it's not 5, it will run up to 5. But however, once it hits 5, it will break. Meaning it will stop and it will break out of this loop and it will stop completely. So it's not going to go to 10. It's going to go to 5. And once it hits 5, it will stop, and I'll show you. It will go to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and because once it hits 5, it breaks out of the function. It breaks out of the method. It breaks out of the loop. Okay. The way you would know how this works is if you run through it in your head. You can't just look at this, and well, you can with experience. But like right now, if you don't understand what for loops is, if I just introduced it to you, you have to run through it in your head. Okay. This prints out every single time it loops, but when it hits 5, it breaks out of the loop, so that's why it stops at 5 and it gets terminated. Because break means to stop, and it stops everything. And that is our short lesson for loops today, for loops.